Man, that's so tranquil.
It's awesome.
They really did a good job on that. So, like, just for people who don't know, like, the video stuff is kind of a canned thing that you can kind of alter. And it came with more of like a kind of music that was like too techno and driving. And so Dan asked his son and his son's friend, partner, to kind of like do something more instrumental. And that's just way better than the kind of matrixy crap that we had before.
Yeah, and it'd actually be great to put up their names. And if anybody out there needs any musical work done, you can get in touch with them through Facebook.
I can type in their names now and put it up if you want to. So it's Max and
Max Wolpert and Sarah Hubbard with 2 B's.
Sarah with an H?
Yep.
I'm just gonna post that in all of our streams here, and I'll post it up here on the.
Or you could also get in touch with me to get in touch with them.
Yeah. So talented musicians, composers, they do all the things.
All the things, producers.
Amazing stuff. Well, I'm Mark Van Steenhoek. I'm the director for the Center for Prophetic Imagination.
And I'm Daniel Wolpert. I direct MICA, the Minnesota Institute of Contemplation and Healing.
And today we're talking about disembodiment and embodiment. And we're, like last time, we're going off of a case study that was shared to us from Ceres, who's been on the show and is a regular commenter. There's this, I'm going to post up a link that we shared earlier. We're discussing this open letter to Mark Walsh. I don't know much about this at all, but Mark Walsh apparently runs this thing called the Embodiment Conference, which I hadn't heard of. But it's got a lot of big names. Like if you look at the speakers, Charles Eisenstein, Gabor Mate, like a lot of the gurus about body and some of the leaning towards contemplative and whole self psychology, that kind of stuff. Sounds good, but almost everyone at this conference that's presenting is white. Most of them are men, and that's kind of a problem.
Right. Particularly because as part of the conference, they talk a lot about all these different practices that pretty much all come from non-white cultures, countries, parts of the world, many of which were colonized. And so somebody from the United States had the audacity to point this out. And, and if you go listen to this audio clip, I mean, one of the things I was saying to Mark here before we started, I mean, you could take this clip and you could insert any number of issues, right? Like you could insert, like we did the whole thing on this progressive Christianity deal, where somebody called them out for, for being all white, and or you could talk about policing, or you could talk about, anything. What we were talking about yesterday, Black folks in job situations. And this clip would be the exact same, or academia, white professors feeling threatened in academia. And the clip would sound exactly the same. It would be the same language, same arguments.
I've heard the same language. I've even used the same language. Like I've planned stuff in the past, and like I just want to. I get it. It's hard when you're like just enshrined in some sort of white way of seeing the world to really grapple with this stuff. Like it's not like we've mastered this and we still struggle with it. But the thing that in particular that makes it gross, it's not that every space has to be proportional to society's ethnic makeup. Like that's kind of like how a lot of people think about it. it's rather like, because sometimes you need spaces where mostly white people are talking about white crap. But when you're having a conference about embodied modalities, almost all of which are coming from outside of what we think of as the Western context, and you have white men as most of the presenters, you
Right.
should be able to examine that. Especially in light of this reality that, like, why do we know about all these modalities? It wasn't from equal cultural exchange. It's from colonization, oppression, and then that filtered through a capitalist mode of passing information. So it's not embodied teacher to embodied student sharing a tradition and lineage with a group of rooted people. It becomes this this name brand kind of recognition industry thing. So when you start talking about the wholeness industry or the the healing industries, it's like, okay, those two words shouldn't necessarily go together.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and so somebody points this out. And of course, this guy comes back with, and he's got this British accent, going. He's like, it's just so annoying. The leftists in America, very distressing. And, I generally am sympathetic, but, when random people on the internet attack me, it's just so silly.
So uncouth. Yeah, that's the thing, is like, it was basically his argument. I've heard this from a number of European friends. I don't know how true this is, because I also hear the same thing from white Americans, that somehow, like, this overemphasis on having diversity is kind of run a little bit amok. And that to your regular Eastern European presenter, they're like, what? We don't even have Black people in Eastern Europe. So what's the issue?
In Hungary, yes.
And so then he pivots to talking about, like, well, you might not see diversity, but this is an international crowd of white men. Like, so that's like where our diversity comes from that. I'm like, okay, now this is true. Like, that is a form of diversity. There's also class diversity, which you might not be able to see with pictures of people's faces. But like, we can see a lot of white men, and we know that white men did not develop these modalities and these traditions and this wisdom.
Yeah, and so just as we were talking about yesterday, what this message sounds like is, or this message is, and the rhetorical technique of this message, right, is this gaslighting.
Mm-hmm.
Of like, well, what's wrong with you? There's not a problem here. There's no Black people in Hungary, so everything's okay. And why are you being overly sensitive? And so then again, the person with less power, less money, who has had their country and culture taken over, listens to this, and some other people or other people that don't know a lot about this listen to it, and they go, well, yeah, what's the problem? Maybe I am just a little crazy or just a little oversensitive. And so it's this gaslighting technique of completely even dismissing that there is this issue. And what's then, of course, fascinating about it in this particular context, the embodiment idea, is that one of the key realities of whiteness is that it's totally disembodied, right? And so, the bizarreness of white people co-opting all this stuff, taking over all of this, making money over it, from it, and while at the same time saying we're embodiment experts, while denying the reality of other people's bodies, is pretty convolutedly weird.
And it's kind of a weird mix of, like, I mean, on one hand, I've heard this a number of times from friends that because when we start talking about cultural appropriation, it's easy to kind of fall into kind of simplistic ways of thinking on different sides of this argument. But the reality is, like, white people, we have experienced a sort of trauma that leaves us disembodied and disassociated. We talk about this all the time. And if you're a white man, kind of slightly grumpy disassociation is the standard of existence. And that's, I feel that in my body. And so like me recognizing that about myself, saying I need to learn some wisdom about how to get in touch with my body, live in better relationship with other bodies in the land. Of course, I'm going to go to non-white, non-Western traditions to learn. That's not a problem. Like, that's a good thing. But when somehow, if I, in 3 years after doing deep study in this, went on the circuit teaching embodiment, like I'd have to really show the ways in which I'm in a proper mutual relationship with teachers or something. Like I can't just go on the market and start saying I'm now an expert because I learned from these people who are somehow not able to come up on the stage and present.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because behind a conference like this, right, is this entire mechanism of profiteering. Right. And so, you have to be connected to capital to be able to put this on. You have to be connected to sponsors and companies that are willing to back you. You have to be connected to an international network of academic centers. You can't just, if you're, some average person somewhere, you can't just say, oh yeah, I'm going to create this great international conference because I come from a long line of, indigenous healers somewhere. You will not get any traction to try to do that. And so there is this enormous power and privilege differential simply be able to create an event like this. And so that's what these white guys are doing. And that's the thing that does not want to be examined.
So a number of comments coming in, and this is a really, I think this is a more of a complex issue for some people to engage because it's maybe outside. Like when you start talking about embodiment, it's like hard for some of us to even know how to talk about it at all. So I understand that, but this is like a really good conversation to hear some feedback on. I'm going to post stuff from Bert. He's got some links. I wish there was a better way for us to share links across all the platforms. Because we can only just post it up here. One from Decolonizing Yoga, about decolonizing yoga practice. That's a big area that gets touchy with people real fast.
Yeah, and if you ever want to see kind of a funny take on this, Google this great video, Gandhi Goes to a Yoga Class, which is absolutely hilarious and really gets at this very well. Yeah.
It also shares something from Brown Girl magazine about how a popular decolonizing yoga summit became a colonizing one. Yeah, that sounds predictable in a sad way. Series writes, what I find all this raging is the fact that many cultures that these white men in the freaking conference are from are the same cultures that demonize the occult culture, opposed all forms of demonic syncretisms, and supported fundamentalist and elitist members of the non-white spiritual traditions.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, this is the thing about this, why I think it's so important, is that there are layers upon layers of colonizing, abusing, disempowering, destroying that we really have to get to, right? I mean, for any white, for example, so let's just stay within the boundaries of the United States or North America, right? So for any white person in North America to profit off of indigenous practices is obscene. I mean, we should recognize that that's obscene. It's like we kill all these people, we say that their culture is evil and bad and unchristian. We force their kids to go to concentration camp schools. We do all these things. And then when we're in control and when all that is wiped out, we're like, ooh, sweat lodges are cool. I mean, that is revolting on so many levels, right? And so, to not do the massive work of reparation,
Yes.
that really should happen before you even say anything about, oh, I'm going to now take more of your stuff. Like, I wiped out your stuff. I told everybody your stuff sucked and nobody should do it. And now I'm going to take it. I mean, I hope we can recognize how incredibly inhumane and disgusting that is. And yet most people don't.
There's a great book from Jack Forbes called Columbus and Other Cannibals. In it, he, from an indigenous perspective, he writes that what we're basically cursed with is a Windigo spirit. We have this cannibalistic spirit that has to eat things. Now, this is part of the challenge, and like I've had a number of conversations with people about this. If you see a sweat lodge as a healing practice, then there's a logic to saying, well, white people need to do that because it'll make them better, and then they'll maybe somehow get to the point where they can do reparations. There's that kind of logic out there. And so there's this tension between sort of a critical eye towards how power and exploitation is happening that sometimes comes in tension with this recognition that, like, we need healing practices if we're going to get better. And when those things come to a head, the problem is almost always is like, well, still this, it's impure. Yes, I'm making money off of it, but it's better for this to be out there than it not. And I feel bad that indigenous people aren't getting their due, but it's better that I do this than not. And that becomes the ruling kind of like, oops. And that's pretty much, that's not that far from what this Mark Walsh guy was saying. Like, don't be too sensitive about it. We'll get to that later.
The problem is that's the logic of the bully. And it's, it's like, I'm going to take all your stuff and, beat you up. And like, I was bullied as a kid, so I know exactly how this works. I'm going to take all your stuff. I'm going to beat you up. And then, oh yeah, would you like 10% of your stuff back? And it's like, no, there's nothing positive about this dynamic. And again, the proof is in the pudding, right? I mean, there have been white people in America, doing this stuff now for 40, 50 years. And that same group of people is not getting any closer to giving reparations than they were when they started doing their sweat lodges. So if that's the logic, it obviously does not work.
Yeah, just like I don't think the driving force in civil rights with indigenous people or Black Americans has come because white people got to a point where they appreciated rap enough. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's not like once white people are able to consume enough of your culture, then we'll appreciate you enough to give you good stuff. Like, that's not how it works.
No.
So this idea that somehow it's just a general net positive to have this stuff go out there because it's delightful, like rap is amazing, so we need everyone to hear rap. Like, that's not the response when you're a white rap appropriator without paying your dues and showing proper respect to where it comes from. Gus writes, as I was saying yesterday, diversity is a euphemism, one that allows the keepers of the status quo to endlessly pivot and change the subject to the ways the group is not, he means homogenous here, not humongous. Yeah, not humongous. What's actually wanted is racial inclusion. Let's call it that. Yeah. Racial inclusion. Well, go ahead, Dan.
Well, and to me, what's actually wanted is to go to have that given group, whatever it is, indigenous group, if you're looking at some kind of Asian practice, African practice, to have leaders of that group, authentic, recognized leaders of that group, say what is to be done about this.
Yeah.
Right. So what would be great, you see, is if this guy, Mark Walsh, and all these white people said, we're going to use our power to create this conference because we can do that. And then we are not going to be any of the speakers, right? We're going to sit in the audience and we're not going to take any money. And in fact, we're going to lose money. We're going to put our money into this, right? And we're going to sit in the audience And we are going to give space for all of these folks from whom these practices come. They're going to be the teachers, and they're going to get all the recognition, and they're going to get all the money, and their communities are going to get all the profit. And then we're going to hand the entire conference over to them. Like, that would be an interesting approach. And again, that never happens, right? And I see this in the integrative medicine world all the time. I mean, you go to these integrative medicine conferences, which are basically these all-white conferences, and you have all of this stuff. You know, you have all of this indigenous healing stuff, you have all of this groovy Asian stuff, you have, you know, all of these kinds of things. And it's all white people giving the talks. And it's an all-white audience, basically. And these conferences are unbelievably expensive. And these people are making millions of dollars off of this thing. And, you know, the people from whom this wisdom comes are basically nowhere to be seen. And nobody seems to get that that's highly problematic.
Bert writes, it's a false dichotomy set up to avoid accountability for how we engage in the cross-cultural exchange. Maybe you could spell out what the dichotomy piece is. I think I'm getting that, but
well, I think it's what you were just talking about, right? That, you know, if we use these things, maybe it's a little problematic, but we'll get better, and then we'll be positive.
It'll be healing, and this is where, like, it's kind of the spirituality will somehow turn you into a political radical automatically, like that kind of thinking almost.
Yeah.
I mean, hip hop played a massive role in radicalizing me. Well, that's the thing. Like, I don't think white people should, like, accept a cruel fate of only having to listen to marching band music for the rest of our life. Which, I don't know. That might be the only white form of music that I can think of off the top of my head. That's pretty purely white. But at the same time, as much as, like, I love some hip hop, and it's especially the political stuff, but we also at the same time can recognize there's a lot of shitty murkiness when it comes to the music industry, how performers have been treated, who's benefited. You can start talking about white forms of appropriation of it. The fact that, you know, there's no ethical consumption under capitalism, so buying these records comes with all sorts of laws. All that's true at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, all right. Well, we're just going to pause here for a second. We're coming down to the end. I know Catherine's probably furiously typing with her gloved hands somewhere, and but if there are other comments, other folks want to weigh in. It's been a fairly quiet comment day.
Thursdays are, for some reason, one of our
Thursdays are quiet days.
Yeah.
Maybe we should just get on here and meditate for half an hour on Thursdays.
But we got to think of an alliteration for that. What's
Yeah.
the spiritual word?
Yeah, I don't know.
We can
anyway, while we're thinking about it, Ceres has another comment here.
Great, thank you. This kind of thing triggers deep imposter syndrome in me as someone who is trained to be a healer and a therapist. Feeling like I don't deserve financial support and compensation for my healing work, while someone who lied about their identity gets accolades.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, I mean, it's horrible. I mean, it's just horrible. And, you know, and I do feel that I want to keep emphasizing this tie to the profit industry. And, you know, that there are these people that are really, you know, and this is where, you know, I like this Windigo Spirit kind of idea. I mean, there are these people that seem incredibly good at gravitating towards basically, how do I make money off of this? And, you know, taking anything and feeling no compunction at all. I mean, it's almost as if their super ego is dead, you know, feeling absolutely no shame of going, yeah, you know, I did this great, like, weekend dream quest, and now I'm the expert on dream questing, and I'm gonna, be this big name speaker and do all this stuff. And it really, the capitalist system is so good at taking all of this stuff and turning it into that kind of money making machine, which then becomes the exact opposite of any kind of healing, decent modality. And again, this embodiment conference very closely connected to all of this integrative medicine stuff. And you see this all the time, right? I mean, integrative medicine in many ways in the United States has just become about, rich people medicine. And you see all these folks who are, charging $600 an hour for these appointments and these tests and all this groovy, cool stuff. And they don't even see that the entire economic system that they're embedded in is incredibly sick.
Mm-hmm.
And so how can you be a healer engaged in that sort of situation? It's highly problematic.
No, the imposter syndrome thing, the way I experience that is like, I have this instinctive understanding that when you bring commerce into spirituality, that's not how it was supposed to be, right? I'm not saying people shouldn't get paid, especially if you're if you're struggling just to get by. I'm not saying that, but at the same time, I feel like a lot of us understand deep down inside that in a right world, money wouldn't be a consideration with this stuff. But a lot of people don't have that compunction at all, and they're willing to exploit and make as much money as possible. And so you're struggling to be a healer, feeling bad about any money being involved at all, watching other people make a whole killing off of this stuff. And it does raise awkward feelings. And like, for me, that's where some of my imposter syndrome, like, if I were any good at this, then I'd be like them too, or whatever.
Yeah.
So I'm feeling what you're saying.
Yeah.
Catherine has a great idea. Y'all should get Adam Comby some time on the political history of hip hop. I mean,
okay, let's do it.
One episode on that, because I think it's fascinating. So, Adam, if you're out there, a message
next
will be
week. Yeah,
if you get time next week.
Dr. Parent talks. People listen. This is unbelievable, Kathleen.
That's so many of these encounters that I will have enough fodder for multiple memoirs, just so you know. This is fascinating. Right. I participated in a college version of Dancing with the Stars. That is enough already.
Just right there.
I just qualified because my black partner and I chose a hip hop song that was deemed inappropriate. There's a lot in there. Yeah. I mean, this is part of the thing, and then white culture.
Which college? I'm curious what college. So that's one question. But yeah, go ahead.
It's interesting, like how our culture will really. It wasn't that long ago when we were wholesale shaming of any of this, and we still are. But then, I bet you if you look at the industry of like choreography, all the performance industry stuff, where most of the money goes, this is a good case study of how this dynamic works. Adam writes that down.
All right.
I'm glad you were out there listening, and it wasn't just. Now we know.
Into the void.
Yeah, we were screaming
so it Kathleen is Missouri Valley College, in Marshall, Missouri. Right. So it wasn't that long ago that, that song, that kind of music within that white space was considered obscene in some way, shape, or form. And so, you get kicked off of the show, and, but now here we are. You went to college like 10 years ago, I think. Here we are a few years later, and, and you've got these white kids in the suburbs, flashing gang signs at each other, which they think is really groovy. And, and you see this all the time with everything. I mean, the other big industry where this is happening right now is the legal marijuana industry. And so you've got all these Republicans, these rich, hedge fund Republicans who have been, leaders in the war on drugs for years and years and years, pouring huge amounts of money into cannabis companies now, because they see that it's coming, and they know that and it's here in a lot of states and places, and they're going to make millions of dollars, and they don't care. They don't care that they ruined millions of people's lives for all these years when marijuana was illegal, and that was the political game they were making money on, and now they're making money on this. And so it's that same kind of thing. It's just, if destroying you can make us money, we'll destroy you. If profiting off of you can make us money, we'll profit off of you. There is no moral center to any of this. And I think that's really important for us to understand, that's part of the process of colonizing and whiteness. There is no moral center. And God just blesses whatever it is that we do. And that's deeply evil.
Some comments. Adam came right in when we were talking about drafting him for the show, so that's good.
All right.
Kathleen writes, it was 10 years ago. As a pastor, I was one of the stars.
There we go.
Celebrity pastor, I guess.
Celebrity pastor.
Oh, yes. I remember
some of your moves.
By so much Christians. It still is by some, but others you can make money off of it. Yeah. I mean, this is one of my takeaways at the very minimum. And this is something that I know that both Micah and the Center for Prophetic Imagination, we talk about for CPI. Like, one of the things we push hard is this idea that you can't talk about spirituality devoid from politics. For us, it's important to develop a political engagement that is led by the Spirit. So that it's important. So it's weird to have such a huge industry talking about wholeness and healing, drawing upon these different traditions, without them also putting forward some sort of way of doing reparations, of healing. Like, repentance requires not just like, oh, it was screwed up the way I'd been white, now I'm going to do these other things from these other cultures till I can be better, right, without healing any harm. Like, that's not a real repentance.
No.
So if we're going to engage this, if we're going to learn from these traditions, we also have to be committed to healing the harm that's been done in the past.
Yeah, and it's very interesting. You and I don't think this is sort of radical or unusual at all, because we're talking about it, thinking about it all the time. But it's always very interesting to me when I go into these spirituality spaces to teach or to lead retreats. And one of the things that I hear from people all the time in a very surprised way is like, wow, you have this real social justice angle on all this. Like, we don't ever hear that from anybody. And it's like this big surprise and very strange thing. That just, to me, represents this complete separation within the white Christian world, where somehow spirituality can't have anything to do with economics and politics. And that's just because of how Christianity has developed in this country, completely in allegiance with both capitalism and whiteness. And if you don't get at that, all you're doing is perpetuating the same old.
Dancing with Celebrity Pastors could be a fascinating show. I think Kenneth Copeland can shake it. Yeah. Some of these elderly men, like, they seem all wooden up there preaching, but they got some groove.
They got some moves. Yeah. All right. Well, thanks a lot, everybody, and I hope you have a good Thursday.
Yeah.
And it's snowing in a lot of places, so enjoy the snow.
And I have a proposal for tomorrow. Instead of calling it Fascism Friday, we can call it Anti-Fascism Friday. That way we can talk about positive things, like how to destroy fascism. So it's not always a bummer.
Sounds good.
A Molotov cocktail workshop. Live on air tomorrow.
All right.
Final comment.
That's the last comment.
God.
Thank
The
you for
same
this great idea series, by the way.
the same people who profit from the healing industry don't want to fund any community healing art schools, cultural communities, and actual rightful practitioners. This is, I think, for those of us, like I think a lot of us who are on the progressive radical end of things, I think we're more in contact with some of this stuff than like if you're a fundamentalist Christian. I think this, for those of us who care about healing, we need to really do the hard work on this and not just reap the benefits without tilling the soil a bit. Don't burn down Shetty.
With the Molotov cocktail workshop.
We use water when we do the workshop. We only use the real stuff when duty calls, you know.
I don't know, Gus. I think you're the one that's got to stay away from exploding stuff.
Yeah, you have a lot of stuff explode on you.
Yeah. All right. We'll see y'all later.